Hello, everybody. I am happy that you are here on this Saturday. If you are catching this on the replay, thank you for coming to the replay or watching the replay. I am joined today by Isabel and Martina for the very first Literary Love Book Club live show for Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. So, Isabel, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your channel?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Jen, for having me as a co host. Hi, guys. My name is Isabel, and my channel is Isabel Reads. And I love all things horror and thriller and mystery and classics. So I am a daytime English teacher and a part time booktuber who loves everything spooky and scary and stuff like that. And I'm just so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you, Isabel. If you are here and watching or watching the replay and you haven't subscribed to Isabel's channel yet, please do so. She does excellent videos, and I just want you to subscribe to her. I am also joined by Martina. And Martina, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Yeah, hi everyone. Firstly, thank you, Jen, for asking me to be here. It's really exciting. This is my very first live stream on YouTube. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Martina. I run a channel called Nocturnal Nasties. It's a brand new YouTube channel. I just started it this year in or around February or March time after 10 years of contemplating and thinking about it, and then just finally took the plunge. Call it a 40s midlife crisis, whatever you will. I just decided to go for it, and here I am. And on my channel, I talk about my favorite genre, which is horror and gothic fiction. But I also do like literary fiction and historical fiction, and I do like some non-fiction as well on all sorts of topics. So yeah, I'm just excited to be here today, talk about this book that I never would have known about had it not been for Jen. So delighted to push myself out of my comfort zone once more and excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. And everybody watching, if you have not subscribed to Martina's channel, please do so because she has amazing content as well. So I will do a quick check in with the comments and see who is joining us today. Hello, Eleanor. I'm so glad that you made it. You've been participating in Discord, sharing a few thoughts. So I'm excited to hear what your experience with Picnic at Hanging Rock was. Hello, Skeleton Key. It's wonderful to have you here. I know I've seen you several times before, but my we were talking about this beforehand. My menopausal brain, I need a little help. Can you please remind me of your name, Skeleton Key? Hello, Jackie. Happy Saturday to you too. I'm glad that you are here for the live show. Hello, Ariel. I'm excited to have you here today. And hey, Adrian, wonderful to see you here for our discussion. So let me know. In a minute, we'll kind of put up some banners and you can let us know what you think. But we'll go ahead now. And I just want to go into, first of all, Martina is going to give us a summary of Picnic at Hanging Rock. I'll put the spoilers banner up too before we get into spoilers. But Martina, go ahead with the summary.
Sure. I'll keep it really spoiler free for now. I do have my notes because a bit like as Jen said, menopausal brain is a real thing, guys. And no matter how many times I read a book right now, I need notes to remind me of what I've actually read. So Picnic at Hanging Rock. I would call this a um literary fiction novel. So essentially the premise of the novel is there's a group of girls. They go to a all girls college. It's called Appleyard College, They get to have a day out at a natural beauty spot known as Hanging Rock. They're there to have a picnic, and it's Valentine's Day. And the girls are going there with a number of their teachers who become major characters in the novel as it progresses as well. During the day, seems like a very normal day until a number of the girls break away. They decide to go for a little hike up the rock to get further towards the summit. And as they do, strange things start to happen. They're pretty much secluded in this area, apart from one or two other people that are there to also have picnics. It's a beautiful day. It's in Australia in the 1900s, so everyone is dressed in the attire of the 1900s, and it's very hot. Clothing becomes an important theme in this topic as we get into talking about themes as well. But I won't spoil that here for you. But essentially, a number of the girls disappear. It becomes a very big thing locally in the community and also for the school. And there are repercussions both locally and also for the children that go to the school and the actions their parents take as a result of that as well. So there are so many themes in this novel that we're going to talk about today that if at least maybe on the first read you could potentially miss. So we're hopefully going to hear what you guys thought as we go through these. But it is known for its very surreal, dreamlike qualities to the point that it is intentionally written such that you don't actually know if it has happened. And in a sense, you maybe don't necessarily get, if you like a really clean cut ending, don't get a very satisfactory ending to the novel either. So we'll say that without spoiling it too much. So I'll end it there. Hopefully, that's a good enough summary that gives it an idea of what the book's about without going into detail. And then we can get to some of the spoilers as we go through.
Wonderful. So, in just a minute, Isabel is going to give us a brief author bio and talk a little bit about the painting that inspired the novel. But before we do that, let's kind of get into everybody's ratings. And Stina, thank you so much for letting us know. Yeah, menopausal brain sucks. I could do a whole show about that, but that's not why we're here
We need
today.
we need to have the menopausal women's book club, I think is what we need.
We do, where we can talk all about it. So let's get into ratings first. So, Isabel, what did you end up rating Picnic at Hanging Rock?
So my initial rating right when I finished, before I started doing my looking up things, researching and all of that, was a 3.5 star. And after I did some researching and I looked up a few things and everything started kind of clicking for me, I'm sitting comfortably, I think. It might change after our live show, but comfortably I'm sitting at a 4 star. Do you want me to explain why, or we'll get to that in a little bit?
I think we'll get to that in a little bit, maybe as the story goes, in case we were given, we might give spoilers.
Yes.
Uh,
It's a 4 star. Yeah.
yeah. Martina, what about you? What did you give it?
Straight out of the gate for me, it was a 4 star. And I don't know if that was influenced necessarily by the book itself or the fact that this is the first book of this type that I'd read in quite a while. So being a very true purist horror fan, I read a lot of kind of, gothic and even gory modern horror, indie horror books that they move really fast, right? So I read very few slow burn books, and this is a slow burn book, but I actually really enjoyed that element of it, I think, because of what I normally read. So I just really enjoyed that. And also there were a number of aspects in the book as well that made it a 4 star for me out of the gate. So yeah, I won't say much more on that for now, but for me it was a 4 star out of the gate. Yeah.
It's a consensus. It's also 4 stars for me. I felt 4 star after I read it initially, and then going back doing the research, it stayed at a 4 star for me. But I could see, depending on how our discussion goes today, it could become a 5 star. So we'll see what happens. Let's see if anybody in the chat has given their star rating. Hey, Liz. I am glad to have you here today. I'm looking forward to hearing what you thought too. And Adrian read it in February. Perimenopausal brain. Yeah, that's bad too. Perimenopause, menopause, menopause. It's all bad. 4 stars. There we go. Yeah, a lot of 4 stars. The writing is stunning. Absolutely. And 4 stars for Stina too. So interesting. We got a lot of 4 stars. So let's go ahead now then. Oh, another 4 star. Yeah. Jackie 3.5. And yeah, Jackie had the same experience as Isabel of enjoying it more after researching it. Yeah. I think that definitely makes a difference in books like this, that you kind of dig into it a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and put up the spoiler banner, because I do feel like what we're about to start talking about will be spoilery. So, and let's see if I can get it to. I want it to scroll, but we won't spend too much time on me trying to figure it out. So anyway, there it is. Spoilers. And I'm just going to keep that up for a little while, because I don't want that down there, the whole time. But just know from this point on, we are going into spoilers. So, Isabel, would you give us a brief author bio, and then do you have a picture, or do you need me to share? I can share the picture.
Yeah, I have it. If you have it, you can share it already. If you have it, you can do that too. Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to do the author bio first and then
Sure.
talk about the painting?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
So, in my research for Joan Lindsay, I found that there were so many autobiographical elements present in the book that she took inspiration from her real life. So, she is a native Australian. She also went to a boarding school for the early parts of her childhood. From the age of 13, she attended boarding school, and that kind of gave a little bit of inspiration for having her setting be in an all-girls school and that kind of environment. She was also a big fan of the arts, and so much so that she eventually would do her own art. She married an artist as well. Her husband was an artist, and I think all of those influences of art kind of inspired her as well to look at this painting, the William Ford painting, and use that as inspiration for the title of the piece, which I thought was really, really cool. That was part of the inspiration. She also had a dream at one point in her childhood that she said was inspiration for this book. And it was also cool that she had a similar experience with like clocks and watches. She said that for some reason, clocks and watches in her real life were always stopping, or were not working. And we know that that is a prevalent part of the book. And it is also like a symbol. It's symbolism in the book. So I thought that was very interesting. In addition to that, she did originally publish her book as we read it now, but originally she had written an alternate ending, which I know we want to get to a little bit later. But posthumously it was released, like the actual ending, the original ending. And I'd love to pick your brains about what you thought of the original ending later when we get to that part. But yeah, just know that she had originally written an alternate ending, not the one that is currently published. So yeah, that was really interesting. And yeah, that's a little bit about her life.
All right. And I'm going to put this painting up. Hopefully, it will work like I want it to. Let's see. It's done this to me before, where it won't let me do what I am trying to do. Let's see if we can. Let's see. Nope, I don't think that's it.
The joys of doing things live. It always happens.
Right?
Right? I do a lot of demos and work. I'll give you a little talk over while you're trying to sort that out, Jen. I work in tech, so we do a lot of like live demos with executives, etc. And I can guarantee you, the minute you decide to do a live demo instead of a pre-recorded demo, that's when your tech is not going to work. So, guaranteed.
Exactly.
Do you want me to try
No.
sharing, Jen? Do you want me to try sharing it to see if it works on
Yeah,
my?
see if you can share. I don't know why. I've got it pulled up on a tab, but for some reason when I click to share the screen, it's not actually giving me the option to share it.
Let's see. Can you guys see that?
No. Oh,
Now,
something's
yep.
Yeah.
happening. Yep. There we go.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So
Thank you.
that, of course, that was actually her inspiration. For the title, and I found that was so interesting, the fact that that and they mentioned it in the book, which I thought was cool too. So there are a lot of like those references to art, and at least my version of the book has, I believe, the still shot from the movie. So I thought that was interesting too. That's what I have as my cover. I don't know if any of you have a version of the book that has this painting on it, but yeah.
Mine's a different it's a different cover, but it doesn't have the painting.
Oh yeah.
It's like the vintage collection. Yeah.
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 All right. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing so you can go back to.
I just think, the painting, it really is interesting how she drew inspiration from the painting to write her story. But there are some concerns about the story. So I'm going to go ahead and get into that historical context. Also, looking at notes to make sure I don't forget anything. So the geological formation and former volcano, which is now known as Hanging Rock, is an ancient, long sacred area to Aboriginal Australian tribes. I hope I'm saying these names right. I did look how to pronounce, but I'll probably forget. But these Aboriginal Australian tribes are the Jaja Wurrung, the Wurundjeri, and the Tongarong. So the rock is believed to have at one time been a very important and sacred space for tribal meetings and may have also served as the demarcation of the place where the tribe's boundaries met. And of course, as English colonists began to come over and to settle Victoria, which is where the story takes place in Australia, around the mid 19th century, whenever the colonizers came over, they ended up brutalizing, killing, or removing many of these tribes that had been there for thousands and thousands of years from this ancestral land. So the Aboriginal name for the formation remains uncertain. It was renamed, of course, by the settlers, but some believe that an inscription on the rock reading Anayalong may refer to an indigenous word. Settlers renamed the formation Digenesis Mountain shortly after their conquest of the area. Its more recognizable contemporary name, of course, is Hanging Rock, and it refers to that distinctive pair of rocks which hang over the path leading up to the Mount summit, which form this kind of bridge. Hanging Rock is now a public reserve, which charges entry for visitors wishing to enter the site. There have been parallels drawn between the history of Hanging Rock and the history of the Six Grandfathers, or what is now, of course, Mount Rushmore in the United States. So there are advocacy groups and one of these groups is named the Miranda Must Go campaign, and it's led by Amy Spears. And this is because there is a statue of Joan Lindsay's character Miranda that stands at the Hanging Rock Visitor Center. And this has led to protests to decenter tourism in the area and to re-educate visitors as to the site's actual, significance to Indigenous people groups. So there are some readings of Picnic at Hanging Rock that will lend themselves to Joan Lindsay's referencing what actually did happen at Hanging Rock. So we'll kind of get into that as we go. So it can be read that she was against what happened at Hanging Rock. And there are other readings, of course, that say she capitalized on what happened there. So it kind of just depends on how you read it. And we'll get into that more as we go. So let's check the comments real quick. Stina used to live in northwestern New Mexico and kept thinking of Shiprock, which is sacred to the Navajo. Yeah, there are so many instances where things like this happened. And just briefly, one of the issues I do have with Picnic and Hanging Rock with the book is rewriting something to make a mystery and having something terrible happen somewhere, but it's really covering up and, kind of going in place of what actually did happen there. But again, like I said, kind of the reading as you go, we can see that Joan Lindsay may have been trying to draw attention to that fact. So we'll go ahead now and talk a little bit about, let me pull up our banner so we can kind of keep going. I should have pulled that up a minute ago. So let's talk a little bit about the characters of the story. So we'll start with Miss Appleyard, who is the woman who is the owner and the proprietor and the headmistress of Appleyard College. She is quite a character. I have a name for her, but I'll save that a little bit. So we definitely see in Miss Appleyard that she is all about appearances, that she is straining for this upward mobility, and that she has really put herself into a position of superiority in so many ways. She also shows great favoritism to certain students, the wealthier and the more beautiful. And she really is abusive to Sarah, one of the characters we'll talk about in a minute, to horrific consequences, for sure. Mrs. Appleyard winds up getting, I think, what she deserves in the end, uh, because it becomes clear once the girls do disappear from Hanging Rock that her main concern is not necessarily finding the girls and trying to figure out what happened to them. Her main concern is trying to keep it all quiet and protect herself. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to talk a little bit about Miss Appleyard? Because I could say a lot, but
Yeah, I think we'll talk about themes shortly as well, but for me, she is almost the personification of like imported British idealism, the
Mhm.
need to have everything just so, the need to control, the need to have things appear to be right so people don't have anything to gossip about is such a British thing, right? So I think her character brings a lot of that to life and everything that's wrong with that. Because in some regards, it's good to be aware of how you present yourself. But she, I think, represents everything that's wrong with that mentality. Um, and therefore when she does get what she deserves, as I would agree with you, Jen, it's almost satisfying. I hate to say, but um, yeah, she's an interesting character. I find her instantly dislikable from the very beginning, perhaps for those reasons, because those are personality traits that I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily drawn to. But yes, I think that there's definitely elements of her character that are tied to the themes that we will talk about a little later on as well.
And I find it interesting too that she's like the closest thing we have to an antagonist, because the true antagonistic forces are others, right? But
Mm.
I do like that she at least is an antagonist, someone we can, I guess, hate
Yes.
because we don't know the true culprit, right, of these happenings. So it gives us someone to kind of dislike, even though there's no true antagonist. So I do enjoy her character for those reasons.
And I also appreciated the way Joan Lindsay described Mrs. Appleyard's appearance. At first, her pompadour is perfect, her clothing is perfect. She's very much all put together. But then, as she begins to unravel,
Hmm.
as the spiraling, the disappearance of the girls and how that's affecting her school. Students are going to be leaving. She then, comes downstairs without a corset and she looks tired and exhausted. And we also find out she has a drinking problem. And I'm going to jump to Sarah a little bit, the character of Sarah, because I do want to talk about something that I didn't think about until I was doing some research into what happens to Sarah in regards to Miss Appleyard's hand and what happens. So let me check my notes for Sarah here again to make sure I don't forget anything. And no, I cannot find my notes for Sarah. But Sarah is the youngest, I think the youngest, or definitely one of the youngest girls. Miss Appleyard has it in for her anyway. Sarah has trouble memorizing. Sarah, at one part too, is strapped to this board to keep her posture straight. And also, she has a benefactor who pays for her way, and he's apparently late on some of the tuition. So Miss Appleyard is threatening to send Sarah away, and Sarah doesn't want to go back to the orphanage because she was abused there. And she's also being abused at Appleyard College, but she does have Miranda there until she doesn't. But of course, Sarah ends up tragically dying, and Miss Appleyard covers it up. So initially, I thought that Miss Appleyard was aware that Sarah had jumped out the window and taken her own life. But there are some readings that say Miss Appleyard actually is responsible for Sarah's death, like physically, that she murdered her. And some of the evidence, I should have written down where I read this, but some of the evidence talks about how she was taken or, trying to get food that Sarah was going to have. So possibly she could have been poisoning Sarah's food and making her sick. Because there's the one part where Sarah doesn't want to eat the food, which that could also be read as, she's just so depressed that she can't eat. But then I started to question, did Miss Appleyard actually kill Sarah? And then the last thing she sees before she runs and jumps off the cliff, she has a vision of Sarah's, body, which we find out Sarah's like face is all crushed. She's found in the garden in the flower bed. So what do you have thoughts? Do you think Miss Appleyard knew about Sarah taking her life, or do you think she did it?
When I initially read it, I thought she had done it, but had no recollection of it, like until later that it flashes into her that this
Mhm.
is what she's done, like in a dream or a vision or something. So I originally did think that she did it. She had just maybe like done it and when in a moment of not being aware of her actions or something like that. But I think then the guilt, because I do think that's, what leads to her death eventually, that the guilt of Sarah's death, I think that's a very probable explanation for that. But I did read it as that.
Yeah, I had the same thought. I thought that she was responsible for her death. In fact, there's a quote where she says, um, I can't remember at what point in the book she says this, but it again, I think demonstrates her character. I will not have hysteria, not at this school. So, like you, I also thought she almost had a hysterical moment that she couldn't recollect where she was responsible for Sarah's death. Um, and the reason that resonated is because the hysteria that she didn't want, obviously, then, appears in her, and then she, does things that maybe she didn't think that she was able to do. But I also think she has a deep-seated hatred of Sarah as well, and it would just make sense that she was somehow accountable. That we'll talk about Miranda later, but you know, she deliberately held Sarah back from going on the trip. If she had gone, maybe she would have gone missing instead of Miranda or the others. So yeah, I definitely think that she had something to do with it, or she did it. Yeah.
And there's even the section where we get into Miss Appleyard's thoughts, and she even thinks, why did it have to be
Hmm.
Irma and Miranda, that went missing? Why couldn't it have been Sarah?
Yeah.
So she already feels that way. And then there's also the passage talking about how Miss Appleyard took all of her anger and frustration out on Sarah because she couldn't really take it out on, the families of these girls who
Hmm.
disappeared because they had the money.
Yep.
And so she decided to just take it out on Sarah. And I found Sarah's story so sad, especially
Hmm.
because the art teacher had offered for Sarah to come live with her, and she never got the letter to her. And the fact that after Sarah dies, then her benefactor sends the letter apologizing to Miss Appleyard saying, I'm going to pay her tuition. Let me know what clothes or supplies she needs now that she's getting older. And it just devastated me. I was so sad about Sarah's story.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
let's check the comments and see what we have people thinking about old Miss Appleyard. Yeah, she doesn't seem to like the students. Yeah, open status. She is so much about appearance and status. Yes, I love that too. The way she spiraled downward physically, mentally.
On that comment, that Adrienne, I hope I'm saying that properly, has mentioned, that reminded me what you're saying there of, has anybody watching or has read The Handmaid's Tale?
Yes.
And I honestly can't remember the name of the characters. I have such bad memory, but the main character that is responsible for looking after the handmaids when they're all together. What's
Aunt
her name
Lydia.
again? Aunt Lydia,
Yes.
right? There's an element when she begins to unravel where that reminds me almost of a little bit like Miss Appleyard and her unraveling state, where as much as you might feel sorry for her a little bit, but then you think about what she actually is, and then you very quickly don't feel sorry for her again.
Two
It's a
very
similar thing.
hated
Yeah.
literary characters, but both,
Uh-huh.
multi-dimensional too, where they're not completely flat. So you
Yeah.
can feel a little bit, but then you're like, nah,
Yeah.
that
For a
bitch
moment,
deserves
you
it.
almost feel empathy or sympathy for them, but then, yeah, you're pulled right back to what they
Yeah.
truly are.
Yeah. So murdered. I think so too. The more I think about it, I think so too, that she didn't just know that she had, died, that she had, caused her death. Same. Yeah, Sarah, that was one of the saddest aspects of the story to me, for sure. Um, so on to some other characters. We have, I think we can kind of talk about them in tandem. Michael and Albert. So Michael is from the wealthy family. He's visiting his British aunt and uncle or something. And he comes from that, like I said, that wealthy family, name, status, uh, and he befriends the coachman, Albert, who is a native Australian. And I just really loved their friendship, that they didn't let class get in the way, because that's definitely a theme in the story that we'll talk about in a little while. Uh, and how they were able to learn from each other. There's even a passage that talks about how when they were talking to one another, they were sort of aware of their differences and aware of where one had the strength or the knowledge in certain areas and the other one didn't. But it's like they were a complement to one another. And initially the police are suspicious of both of them when the girls disappear, because they had been there when it happened and they'd seen them. But over the course of the novel, Michael, or Mike, as he's often called, gets really obsessed with trying to find the girls. And Albert, goes along with him and actually ends up saving Michael's life, because there's a point, and we'll probably talk about this a little more too, where Michael falls asleep while he's staying overnight to look for the girls, and he wakes up and he's got this gash on his head, and it's like time slipped away from him too. And I think it's really poignant that they had that friendship, and that as it ends up in the end, Albert is rewarded by Irma's father. So now he has money, but instead of choosing to go work for Irma's father, he decides instead to travel around Australia with Mike. And Mike, of course, leads Albert and the other, searchers to Irma's body. So she is, the one they recover. And we'll talk about her in a minute too. But does anybody else have thoughts about Albert and Mike? Yeah, kind of creeping on them, being that kind of guy that's like, ooh, pretty girls, let me just see what they're up to. So it kind of, you may feel suspicious of him at the beginning too. Yeah. Any other thoughts about Michael and Albert?
I don't know if this is. I honestly can't recall. Did I read this in the book or did I read it during my research? But was there something about them being half brothers, where Albert was actually Mike's secret half brother?
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I definitely it came across it because I've got a note here of it somewhere, and I don't know if I'd read it in the book or if I'd heard the research about it. But I think that would be interesting because you see that a lot in historical fiction, right? Where you have, someone who is the love child of a father from a wealthy family, and they have a connection with the sibling who's wealthy and is known to be the heir to the wealthy family, etc., and they just really get on because the heir doesn't want to be the heir. And so I got that vibe as well from Albert and Mike. They were like they balanced each other, and
Mhm.
Mike almost didn't want to be from the aristocracy line that he was from. Albert almost admired him, but at the same time was a little bit envious of what he did have sometimes as well. So yeah, so if that is true, that would make their relationship make a lot more sense as well, I think.
That's an interesting read.
Mm.
I want to go back and now look for
Yeah,
some
I wish I'd
evidence.
written the source, but I didn't write the source. So I'm gonna have to go back and research where I found that from. Yeah.
That is really cool to think about. So now let's talk a little bit then about the girls who go missing. But first, I want to start with Edith, who almost goes missing, but then ends up running back. So I want to start with her by saying I really grew tired of the fat phobia that was associated with Edith. All of her character flaws were traced back to her appearance and her weight. And I did not appreciate that. So, other than that, though, it is, I really have to wonder why she did turn away. She mentioned that there was this red cloud. And, you would think since she was already up there with these girls that she admired and wanted to be like, that she would have just gone ahead when they went up. but something, stopped her and she left. And do you have any thoughts about why she left and didn't go ahead and follow them?
It's well, I have some interesting maybe questions, not so much answers to this, but questions as far as, I mean, is the commentary there that she wasn't even good enough to get abducted like the other girls were? Because we also see how Sarah's forbidden from going on the picnic. She's not good enough to be in the picnic. And Edith kind of begged them, "Oh, can I please follow you? Can I
Mhm.
go with you?" So it's almost like it felt to me like there's something saying like she was not at that level of the other girls to be selected or chosen to be one of the missing. So I wonder if, I mean, that's where my mind went, that she wasn't picked or chosen or one of the good ones or good enough as Miranda, who's, such an important part of the book. So yeah, those were my thoughts on that.
It's really interesting because I had the exact same thought. Uh, and I had the same thought in relation to there is definitely a recurring theme of nature and the importance of nature
Mhm.
throughout this and what happens in nature, natural selection. Okay, nature will choose the most appropriate, suitable, people, animals in the species to go forward. And for that reason, I had the same thought about Edith. Okay, did nature, Hanging Rock, whatever it is that is happening there, choose not to allow her to go forward for that very reason? And I have another interesting quote here about Edith as well, where they talk about Edith ran screaming, the sound echoing through the rock like something already dead. So, she's just unimportant. She's not really
Mhm.
worthy of it, so let's not pay her any regard. So it's interesting that we had the same thought.
I think that makes a lot of sense because there's also the part too where Edith mentions how there's nothing living there. She talks about before the events go down, pretty much right after they get to Hanging Rock. She says we're the only living beings here, so she's completely negating the mountain itself and nature in that respect, but also animals, insects, which play a big part too. You get the insects taking over. You get a lot of references to that. So yeah, perhaps she disregarded nature, so it disregarded her too.
Mm. It's
I think
I've just had
that's
another thought on that as well
mhm.
when we're on the topic of nature, I guess. And as animal instinct is, you have a flight or fight response when you're in a certain situation. And arguably you could say maybe Edith is the flight response, where she is a fearful character anyway, so she decided to leg it out of there because
Yeah.
she was too afraid of what was happening. Whereas the other um two girls, one of them was actually quite interested in nature. I can't remember which one it was. Was it Marion? Is it Marion who was like really into like sort of
Yeah,
science and
she
nature
wanted
and
to
stuff?
measure stuff.
Yeah, so her curiosity would have caused her to want to fight, to go forward, to see what was up there. So could be interesting to look at it from that perspective as well.
I think so too. So let's talk about Miranda, the
Mm.
wonderful Miranda, described as a Botticelli angel, right? Most popular, most beloved, a senior girl at Appleyard College. One of the shining examples of a proper young woman. She's kind to those, so she's not just outwardly beautiful, but she has a kind and gentle nature to her. She is definitely beloved by Sarah, and there could be also a bit of a queer reading there in the way that Sarah feels
Mm.
about Miranda. Um, she's very protective of Sarah, and she has a special love for nature too. And she's the only one too that she really does you know have a lot of reverence for plants and animals and nature. She's a natural leader, even though Marion, that we mentioned before, is the one to suggest trekking up to the base of Hanging Rock. Miranda is the one who actually ends up leading the girls higher and higher. And there's also something that she says to Sarah, that Sarah says later in the book, that Miranda had said to her that Miranda said to Sarah, I won't be here much longer, so you need to learn to love the other people here too. So that could be read in two ways, that Miranda meant because she's a senior, she'll be leaving, or because she knew that when they got to Hanging Rock, that she was never coming back. So I liked that kind of double reading of that aspect. Any thoughts about Miranda?
Yeah, she's definitely hailed as the popular girl, but most times in literature, the popular girl isn't necessarily the one that's the nicest or kindest. So it's interesting to see how her character was written and that she was both, right? Which is almost the idealistic version of human nature is you're both beautiful inside and out, right? So she had both of those characters. There was something I felt almost prophetic about her character. She was the quote that you just mentioned or the scenario you just mentioned is one that I noticed as well. She almost had a realization that she wasn't going to be around for much longer, and that could be literal, it could not be, but she was also the one that led them up the mountain. So, what was she leading them towards? And I find that, is there a religious connotation to that somehow? I'm sure that if some people on here are, very deeply religious, they might see that or not. But yeah, there was something almost prophetic about her character in and of itself, I find, for that reason.
Yeah, I also felt that same thing. It's funny that you mentioned the religious thing because I almost saw her as like this archetypal, like a Christ figure kind of a thing, like a
Mm,
savior, because she is a savior to Sarah. And so I felt there was a lot there with her and how we know of her, but we don't know her.
mm,
Almost she's like this a goddess or a god figure. So I thought
Mhm.
she played around a lot with those archetypes, those religious archetypes with Miranda.
yeah.
I also like the comparisons to like the swan and all of transformation kind of comparisons with her character too, and all the swan references also reminded me of Bunny. If you know, if you read
Uh-huh.
Bunny,
Uh-huh.
I
um,
haven't read it yet, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
that swan thing kept reminding me of Bunny,
Yes.
and so yeah. But I thought there was a lot of symbolism there that I want to think more about.
Hmm.
There's a
Because
lot.
after she goes missing, often when Mike is thinking about her or talking about her, there is a white swan
Mm.
that appears. So it does kind of make you question: is Miranda now a swan? Did she, or is that just figurative?
Hmm.
Eh,
I
Which,
love that
which
aspect.
which could tie back to the religious element as well, because in some cultures, swans are what's the word I'm looking for? They're indicative of a reincarnation. So it's an animal that you can be reincarnated into, especially in Irish folklore. There's a lot of talk about, people reincarnated as swans, etc., in various pagan religions way before Ireland became a Christian country.
Mhm.
So yeah, so the use of the swan was quite interesting, I felt as well.
Yeah. And so let's just a little bit with Marion. We talked about her. She also disappears. And then Irma disappears, but she is found. She's wealthy, an heiress. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about her in a few minutes when we get into the themes. A couple of other minor characters. I'm probably going to butcher her name because I'm not good in French at all. Uh, Mademoiselle Diane de Poitiers is one of the teachers who goes on the picnic, and she's a likable teacher. I liked her a lot.
Mhm.
She was really good with the girls, and she stood up to Dora Lumley, who was another person who worked at the college who was not very likable. And she also met a creepy and untimely end with, her brother came to pick her up. They, decided that she was no longer going to work at Appleyard College. And they went and stayed in a hotel that ended up burning up. And they both died. So it was also a part of like the book that mentioned before all this happened. I'm paraphrasing it here, but it says something like the events at Hanging Rock would continue to loom over people. And I thought that was really foreshadowing for sure. And also the way that they didn't only loom over the individuals who went to Hanging Rock, but also other people at the school
Mhm.
too. So it was like the long lasting effects. And that is one of the aspects that made me read this as Joan Lindsay critiquing and bringing attention to what actually did happen, what came to be known as Hanging Rock, the violent. She talks about Hanging Rock being a violent place and overshadowing all the events of the story. But I read that as that could also be tied back to what actually did happen there, to the indigenous people groups, and the way that you might try to rewrite history or you may try to cover it up. But the fact of the matter is always going to be there, and it's going to have lasting repercussions. Um, so I think if we have any other characters to talk about, we may do that in the themes. I do want to mention the other character who goes missing, Miss Greta McGraw, the math teacher who was talking on the way to a picnic at Hanging Rock, or she was talking about the isosceles triangle, saying we could take this way, or when we come back, we should go this way. She was very prim and proper, very serious. But when Edith is coming down from Hanging Rock, she meets Miss McGraw going up to Hanging Rock, and Miss McGraw is dressed only in her skivvies. So she has not only taken off the corset, which we do find out that when Irma was discovered, her corset was gone too, which is very out of character for her, because she would always wear that corset, right? Proper Victorian young woman. But Miss McGraw has totally flipped her, outward appearance, kind of like Miss Appleyard did too as we went down, except where Miss Appleyard kind of spiraled into a despair state. It seems like Miss McGraw just literally threw off all the expectations of society, all the constricting nature
Mhm.
of having to be prim and proper. So she was just like, screw it. I'm going up here like this.
Yeah.
So what do we think about about Miss McGraw?
I have to admit I did find that part slightly humorous because I just instantly thought of my old maths teacher at school who was very prim and proper, and instantly thought about if she had done that, it would have been just absolutely hilarious. The scene reminded me of um, your aunt that is normally very well spoken, kind of the old wise owl of the family that has a glass of wine at a party, and all of a sudden you see the real her. That's
Yes.
what that scene reminded me of, um, where she just thought, oh, well, I may as well just go for it. But yeah, there's something, I think the symbolism behind that was probably akin to women in those days were very restricted. There was a lot of expectation about not only how you acted, but how you dressed and how you held yourself. And her being a teacher, not just a teacher, but a math teacher as well, a very logical, you know, kind of profession to be involved in. Everything has to be just so. And then to see then that complete and utter, flip side then of her, taking off the, well, she don't know if she took it off or not or what happened, but you know, of the declothing of the corset, I found was very interesting and symbolic, obviously, of the times when
Mhm.
women obviously wanted to break free from, those restraints that they very clearly felt but couldn't break free from, you know.
Cheers to breaking from the patriarchal
Yeah,
societal
burn the
expectations.
bras.
Chardonnay, here we go. Any other thoughts about Miss McGraw?
I found her interesting, and the commentary surrounding education and mathematics and liberation. I feel at one point, I don't know if it's Edith, but Edith is forbidden from studying math or taking advanced math because it's not, women don't need that or ladies don't
Right.
need that. So I thought that was already indicative of the math teacher having like a more rebellious or curious kind of spirit, breaking that very fixed view of what women should be into, or that kind of a thing. So I found her to be interesting, and she willingly goes. And it's also
Mhm.
common on like curiosity as well. I think the girls are also curious, and we know how literature throughout time treats curiosity and women and all of that. So I think there's some underlying themes of that too, of women being intrinsically curious and, being the reason for the downfall of, everything else. So I think there's commentary there with her to be explored. So I liked her character, actually. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's interesting actually because wasn't she the one in the carriage that allowed them to take off their gloves but not their hats? She was like,
Yeah,
you can do a little bit to break the rules, but not a lot to break the rules,
right.
you know? So yeah, there was definitely, as you say, probably a wee bit more rebellion behind her than she would normally have let people see until she dis-
Yes.
decided to ascend the rock. Yeah.
She fell under the influence of the rock.
Yeah.
So we will now switch over to, I think, talking about the themes, which again, some of that will overlap with talking about there'll be some character discussions here too with the themes. So the first theme that I really want to talk about is nature, repression, and colonialism. So we've already talked about the actual location, Hanging Rock, and what it meant to, indigenous people groups who were displaced in brutal ways. Um, but then as the story goes on, Joan Lindsay really starts to show how the forces of British colonialism have sought to repress, contain, and even obliterate nature, just in the same way that the colonizers wanted to wipe out people groups. They also wanted to have control of nature itself. And so in this novel, Lindsay points out that there is a connection between the forces of nature, colonialism, and repression. So those two themes throughout the novel, they feed on and actually grow from one another. And there is this cycle then of fear and violence. Though the characters in the novel live in the midst of the untamed and perhaps untamable region, they are largely removed, both physically and emotionally, from any sort of meaningful interaction with nature. It's like a big adventure to them to go take this, trip into nature anyway. The Appleyard schoolgirls, they are brought to this picnic at Hanging Rock, but they're actually discouraged from exploring the rock itself. They're told, oh, you really need to stay in the picnic area. You can't go up on the rock because it's too dangerous. So they have this very controlled existence, not only controlled here in the aspect of don't go up that mountain, because it's too dangerous, but also in some of the ways we talked about already within a patriarchal society, they're not allowed to take off corsets or to, step outside of what's supposed to be prim and proper for a lady. So not only do, a patriarchal and a colonization type society seek to subdue nature and the indigenous groups that are there, but they also seek to subdue and control certain members within their own community, all under this guise of, well, we've got to keep the women safe, right? We've got to protect these girls. There's so much danger out there. So it's definitely not to the same level as what happened to the indigenous tribes who were first in this area. But it really goes to show that in a colonized, this colonization mentality, that it also seeks to harm the members within that too. And I think we see that in real ways still today in certain elements that we won't go too deeply into in this discussion. But it's this idea that any society that would do what this type of society does to indigenous people is certainly not really looking out for the best interest of everyone, even within that society. Um, so there is that connection between colonialism and patriarchal oppression, and the way that nature doesn't care about either one of those things. Nature is ultimately more powerful. And that's something else too, is this concept of the sublime, where you have a simultaneous fear of nature, for example, but you're also drawn to it. And this novel really lends itself to that idea that you know there's something dangerous, but it's beautiful in one respect. So you're drawn to it, but then you're also afraid of it. So any other comments that anyone wants to share about the themes of nature, colonialism, and patriarchy?
I think I think for me, there's definitely a huge contradiction that's really obvious in the novel between the natural world and what we as human beings have put in place as controls or societal norms that only exist in our species, right? We're one of the only species in the world to, have manual controls around things. You think of every other species in the world, right? Nature allows it to do what it does and it finds a way to exist. And it finds a way to exist and evolve in the right way, and that is how it evolves. Whereas as human beings, what we tend to do is we need to control everything, be that through colonialism and taking over the land of others to have greater control and expand, be that through the patriarchy to try and keep a certain segment of society down so another can flourish. um that contradiction is really, really strong in the book, and it's almost like Hanging Rock is the personification. I don't think that's the right word, but it symbolizes the fact that nature just will not be controlled. So no matter how many controls you think you put in place, right, nature will always win because ultimately it is the larger force, which I think you just said as well, Jen. So I think the overlapping of all those things are very deliberate, and the ultimate kind of takeaway for me was nature is the bigger force here, right? We are little specks on a single planet in the universe. And, no matter how much control we think we have and how much control we try to have by doing these things, there is a bigger force at play that will always have the upper hand.
And that gives it a cosmic horror reading too.
Yeah,
Talk
exactly.
about it's gothic
Good
because
point.
you have the haunting of the past coming back to affect the present,
Hmm.
but it also can be read as cosmic, like you just said, because
Hmm.
ultimately, we are these little specks in the big scheme of the cosmos. Isabel, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, there was so much with what you guys were saying about that. I love that duality that the book kind of creates, right? That juxtaposition of the grandness of the universe and the insignificance of humans and human impact, and how we can try to make sense of the world, decipher the world, explain the world, understand the world, but it's just grander than we are. And I like that part of the ambiguous ending. Like we can't fathom, understand, or explain what it is that happens because we're not capable of it. So I do like how I feel there's a lot of those comparisons. I also like the comparisons or dehumanizing of the characters and comparing them to various animals. And
Mhm.
I enjoyed that too, because I think it connects to that as well. So yeah, and I do think that's the horrifying part of it, or that like daytime horror or out in the real world kind of horror part that was wonderful, which I really enjoyed.
I did too. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit now about the uncanny and the unknown. We'll kind of also, be talking a little bit as we go with repression, unconscious, and dreams. But if we think about that and also think about this idea of mystery and the unknown, like you just said, Isabel, this idea that we cannot know what happened, and partially because we couldn't understand it. So it is left unresolved, at least in the version that made it to print. So we'll talk a little bit about a different ending at the end of our discussion. But it wrestles with the fact that the characters and we have no discernible answer or cause for what has happened. it really goes into the surreal and the uncanny too, where something that should be familiar and simple ends up being unfamiliar and complicated and complex. That something else too really is the idea that you use this dark pattern that I mentioned before that begins unfolding after the initial disappearance at the rock, and then it keeps going to show how the characters in their lives become consumed for this desire for some sort of closure and certainty. You have people who are determined, the gossip, mongers are going and talking about it and determined to know what happened, um, even though there's not going to be any sort of satisfactory answer for them. Lindsay switches between characters' perspectives, um, and has suggestions that would say that there is something strange, of course, and supernatural in what took place at the Rock. The girls seem to be hypnotized by unseen forces too. They kind of step out of time and
Mhm.
start going up the rock almost in this hypnotic state. So, one of the things too is the way that time, this kind of lends to liminality and time and the relativity of time. The watches all stop at 12 o'clock. And that's an interesting event to happen at any rate, but it's also interesting because noon is like a liminal time, that kind of in between, because you're leaving the morning, going into the afternoon. And there are, beliefs that any sort of liminal time, whether it's, midnight or our noon, or for example, summer solstice, winter solstice, any of those liminal times where you're between things, one thing is ending and another thing is starting, um, is that is when the veil between the worlds of the living and the worlds of the dead are thinnest. So you have events like that. So I kept thinking about that too. And there's even a mention later in the book, a quote about how it's between, I think it was midnight and dawn, where people would do the most dreaming at night. So all of that started, really making me think about that idea of liminal time. And even the people who weren't at the Rock were falling asleep. Miss Appleyard was sleeping back at the college. People at the Rock, they were falling asleep and then waking up. And, we know even for ourselves, even in our own beds, sometimes when we initially wake up, there are moments where we're not quite all the way awake, we're not quite all the way asleep. We think things, we see things, or hear things. And I just kept thinking about that aspect of everything too, that sleepiness. And when Mike goes back to the Rock after the events, he falls asleep. So there's that idea of just time not being, consistent. And then even the doctor talks about Edith when he's trying to examine her, and they're trying to also get Edith to be able to explain to everybody what happened. The doctor describes her not being able to recall what happened. He says it's like her brain stopped, like a clock stopped, her brain stopped, and she can't remember anything that happened. So I just loved all of that. So any thoughts about all of those, any of those things?
I like connecting that to what we were saying before, because as humans, we try to control, right? So time is one way in which we control and make sense and
Mhm.
give order to things. And so here comes, like, the natural world, and brings that chaos. Well, this is what I do with your time. I stop
Yeah.
it, and you will not know exactly what is happening or what time it is, or any of those things that we as humans use to control the world around us. So I think it connects beautifully to what we were saying before.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And then on the piece around sort of the uncanny and the unknown, I wrote down a really interesting quote, which was something dreadful had happened, and the dreadful thing was that no one knew what it was. And again, as human beings, we have to know everything, and we have to be able to rationalize everything that's happening. And if we can't rationalize it, it almost didn't happen. It's like, if people believe in the paranormal, you know, very logical people will say, well, no, that didn't happen because you've no evidence that it happened. And it's like that quote, and I don't know who ever said it, but you always hear about it, which is, if a tree falls in the woods but nobody hears it, does that mean it didn't happen? You know?
Right.
So again, it's like, I think it's drawing a parallel with us as human beings, that we think that we know everything, right? But in actual fact, we know very, very little in comparison to what goes on in the universe. And just because we can't see it or remember it or even observe it or feel it, doesn't mean it's not happening. So there's definitely a link, I think, between the uncanny and the unknown, and the power of the universe and nature as well.
Yes. And there's also a quote too that mentions, like, there's something like, if you could have an aerial view of what happened, if you could see these girls, at the picnic, that they would look like ants just kind of going
Hmm.
all around. And I just thought that was very interesting too, because you also have, when Irma is found, there are like ants and there are flies flying around her. So initially they think she's dead. Um, so just this whole idea of whatever is out there, we look just like little ants or whatever, scurrying around to whatever is out there. So let's check the comments. Nature, yes, versus control. The characters lose control of themselves, the headmistress, and the girls attacking the one student, yes, who
Hmm.
survived the rock. Yes. Let's talk about that. Because initially, when the girls find out that Irma has been found, before they actually see her, they're very excited, right? Everybody's a buzz and everybody's happy she's found. But when she actually goes into, like, the gym where they're doing their classes, the girls turn on her. And again, I'll butcher the name, Miss Mademoiselle de Pointers. She says something like, she looked, and it was like this gossamer thread kind of came up and went over the girls. And the girls, when they see Irma, it says that they were back at Hanging Rock. So that is, a question of, did they just think about being at Hanging Rock, or did whatever, I think, whatever these forces are, literally put them back at Hanging Rock, at least to their, experience. And they turn on Irma and start attacking her and yelling at her, saying, "You know what happened? Why don't you tell us?" So, why do you think they reacted that way? Trauma, I think, has a lot to do with it. That they weren't allowed also to process their trauma, because Miss Appleyard shut down any conversation. Not only, did she try to keep conversation or gossip from spreading outside of the school, but she also didn't want them talking about the events at the school. So these girls who were at Hanging Rock and then had to leave Hanging Rock without three of their friends and their math teacher, obviously went through a very traumatic experience. So they had to keep that bottled up. So a lot of their trauma, I think, just got dumped on Irma. Um, any thoughts about that?
I think it's definitely that. I also thought there was an element of, and this happens today, right? Even you see it on social media. The very untrusting nature of people is to immediately think the worst of something when it should be something to celebrate. So, Irma survived, everyone should be celebrating that, but immediately they jump to, oh, why did you survive and no one else survived? I mean, you saw it recently, right, with, the airplane crash in India, and the one guy that survived, and the whole of social media was like, well, no, absolutely, that couldn't happen, right? And they turned on the guy because what should have been a miracle, they were making into a complete conspiracy theory, right? So I think there's an element there of the nature of us as human beings. Again, we are flawed, and we immediately jump to the bad thing as opposed to celebrating the good thing. So that was something that I picked up as well as one of the reasons as to why they turned on her. It's just our nature to do that as people,
To
which is
have a
not a good thing.
scapegoat, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I had very similar thoughts to that. It almost felt like it's the pointlessness of Irma coming back. Like, you know, which is awful, right? I mean, yay, she survived. That's great. We should be happy. But it's almost telling us this is pointless. Like, you're back. Why are you back? Are you not helping us find the others? Do you not have
Mhm.
any information to add? So it almost feels like that's making comment on that. Like, there has to be a reason why she's back. Like, they're trying to make sense of it or come up with an explanation as to why, out of all the girls, she survived, or why she's back. And I think at the beginning, Edith, with all the questioning and how they were interrogating her and trying to get answers from her, it was similar to that. Like, what do you mean you don't know or you don't remember? And now with Irma, it was even worse because she was actually gone and then came back.
Yeah. And I think like repression too, even if they could possibly remember something, if it's so traumatic, they may be repressing it for their own, like their brain trying to protect them from whatever did happen. Let's see, Stina said, yeah, how much of time is a Western construct, right? Trying to enforce, limitations or structure in areas that don't want the structure and won't won't have the structure. So a little bit, I think we talked a lot about class and wealth. Was there anything else that we wanted to mention about class and wealth?
I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we've covered most of the points, unless some of the guys have anything else in the chat.
All right.
You can add that in.
So we'll talk a little bit about symbolism. I think we've mentioned, Hanging Rock enough to know that it symbolizes the actual horrific events that took place there between the colonizers and the indigenous people, and also the as Martina mentioned, that personification, right, aspect of Hanging Rock, that it is treated as something living and following these girls after the event, which again goes back to the idea of Joan Lindsay potentially writing this as a way to say, you may try to cover up what happened here in the past, but it's always going to be looming over you. You can't escape the horrific, things that were done at this place. And let's see if I had any other things that I wanted to say about Hanging Rock. Um, Anything else that either one of you or anybody in the comment wants to say about Hanging Rock? All right. The other symbolism, of course, is clocks and watches, which we've talked a lot about clocks and watches and time. Does anybody have anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about in respect to clocks and watches?
I
Watches?
just I was just going to mention what we kind of were chatting about before we officially went live, which was the Bermuda Triangle, which was an interesting piece I
Yes.
came about in my research, and I think that's threaded across a number of things. So the triangle piece we've already mentioned, Mrs. McCraw, and the fact that she was she was talking about the isosceles triangle, and obviously the Bermuda Triangle. Things go in there, they don't come out. There's a loss of time, etc. So there's that whole aspect of that. I believe as well there was a lot in the press about the Bermuda Triangle around the same time that the book was written. So I don't know if that is something that Joan Lindsay is deliberately referencing, symbolically through these other things as well. So yeah, I found that interesting that it came up in the research, and it's not something that would have been apparent to me from reading the book. It could have been of its time that it was, a topic of the time, and therefore she's kind of referencing it, through the work.
And it's also interesting what Isabel said in the brief bio of Joan Lindsay, how apparently throughout her life, clocks and watches stopped in her presence too.
Mm.
And she wouldn't really answer questions about whether or not the disappearance at Hanging Rock actually happened, whether it was based on a true story. And she takes some elements of an epistolary work in Picnic at Hanging Rock, because you do get, interviews, police interviews, and you get the newspaper article at the end. So she's kind of putting those things in there. So another thing I did want to mention that I forgot to mention earlier is that and by the way, Picnic at Hanging Rock was published in 1967, but Joan Lindsay's first book was published in 1936, and that is Through Darkest Pondaleo. And it was this kind of pseudo travel log that was also written in epistolary format. It's like a sort of satirical spin on the travel logs of the, people who were traveling all over Europe. You know this if you are familiar with British society, right? That you would have wealthy people who would do travels all over Europe. So in this satire, she uses a pen name too. She published it under the name of Serena Livingstone Stanley. And Serena Livingstone Stanley is actually one of the main characters in the novel, who travels along with, I believe it's her sister, to go across Europe. And in this book, they end up visiting an island off the coast of Sri Lanka that is inhabited by cannibals, and they have to face down this series of trials and tribulations. So, again, because it's satirical, she could also be drawing attention to the ways that colonizers, their beliefs they have about indigenous peoples, thinking and calling them cannibals, or acting like, they're so much more civilized. So she potentially was kind of bringing attention to that, like she possibly was with Picnic at Hanging Rock. So that's just a little bit more about the background there of her and her way of looking at certain events and situations. Any other thoughts about clocks, watches, or the, kind of relativity of what's real and what's fiction?
There's an interesting, I think, you hear about this a lot, right? And I actually think from memory, I heard my parents even talk about it, that, when someone passes away, a clock stops in the room at the moment at which they passed away. And that process that you go through in between someone passing away and the funeral, the wake, which we would do here in some cultures, and then the funeral, time disappears. Those days don't really make any sense. And there is a lot of, I guess, symbolism in the book about sort of death, etc., as well. And that sort of, I just find that interesting. I've just thought about it, how the loss of time when something dies or someone dies, and that in between space where you don't really feel like you're living is a really interesting concept. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and that
And
cyclical nature of time and nature and life
Mm,
and death and how it all comes back. And
yeah.
because I know Miranda says something about the everything ends and begins when it should. I know that's a big paraphrase,
Hmm.
but she says something like that. So just kind of alluding to the fact that there, even if we don't see it, nature has
Yeah.
a way of, ending and beginning things in a way that makes, sense to nature, even if it doesn't to us. Yeah, that is to Eleanor in the comments, that how Irma survived after 7 days lost. Yeah. Anybody have any opinions or ideas about how she survived during that time? Because we don't think she had water. Dude, anything else? So I think that's one of those questions that we won't have an answer to, right?
Did she survive? There's the question. Did any of them survive? Is it all a dream? You know, so I think there's definitely, if you zoom out, those bigger questions as well, um, is it a shared dream that they're having in some way? Is she still lost and she has dreamt coming back? I think if you start to think about that dreamlike nature of it as well,
Mhm.
you could go in a lot of different directions, which might explain the 7 days because clearly, that is a long time to go in the Australian essentially desert without food or water. So it would lead you to think, did she actually survive, or did any of them survive, and was the whole thing an afterlife of sorts, or are they all still there and this is a dream that we're getting to experience her coming back?
Yeah,
And if
there's
it's has it really been 7 days, or did time stop for them and it's been
right.
just
Good point. Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Because yeah, the element too, like we said, of there possibly being, obviously there's some sort of other dimension. I noticed too. I believe it's one of the, you know, are they called constables? I don't remember exactly what they're called in Australia, constables, but I think it's one of them or one of the law enforcement anyway who says something like those girls would have been found if they're still on Hanging Rock.
Hmm.
So that could be read in the literal sense, like if they weren't dead, we would have found them. But in this sense of having another, dimension or a parallel universe, it could be read that way as in, if these girls were still on Hanging Rock, we would have found them. Pocket, yeah, like Stina said, pocket dimension, yeah. This idea of some other place where these girls have gone, where they can be free of constraints, right? Because we do know going up the mountain, Miss McGraw was down in her skivvies, and Irma was found without her corset. So any quotes or anything else we want to share before we talk about the last chapter that was not included in the book because Joan Lindsay's editor said no, let's not wrap it up, and she agreed because that lends itself into the idea of leaving behind constraints of Victorian society.
There was one quote just which I think ties to what we've just talked about in relation to Irma, and it said, it was as though she had been born again, but to what world? Which is
Mm,
interesting when we talk about the alternative dimension piece, because maybe she has come back, but it's in a different dimension where time is different or there is no time at all. But yeah, that's the last of my quotes. I've used the rest of them.
and also too, I'm thinking about in terms of reading it through the lens of patriarchal oppression. One thing that Irma says when she comes back is that she survived the worst and the unthinkable and she came back from it. So she has no issues standing up to Miss
Mhm.
Appleyard
Yeah.
and throwing off the propriety of addressing your elder or your superior with any certain form of respect. She is basically like, I survived all of that, so you woman are not going to make me bow down to you anymore. And I
Mhm.
loved that aspect of throwing off the expectations of a very strict society.
Yeah.
Isabel, did you have any quotes that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I right at the beginning, I find it interesting that everything goes back to Miranda, like why her? She's the first. It says Miranda was the first to see the monolith rising up ahead. Like it's almost like she is the way, like she's the one that's destined to be there. And it goes back to the conversation she has with Sarah about not coming back. And so I feel like she has an important, I just can't figure it out. What is it? Like why Miranda, or why is she the chosen one, or what does that mean? So
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by her because it all revolves around her, yet we know very little of her. She has very little like page time, so
Does she represent the good that we want in humanity that we fail to really get potentially?
yeah.
Um, she's beautiful in a traditional way, and a nice person, a good person, a kind person, all things that we kind of want to be, but inherently all the other characters have some degree of a flaw, which represents, human nature in a more true sense. Um, so yeah, maybe. But yeah, she's the definite draw of the book. Yeah.
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 It's almost like she's too good to be true.
Mm,
Mhm.
yeah.
All right, let's see. So let's talk about this last chapter, which was actually left out. Um, so I like it the way it is. I'm glad they didn't put in this last chapter, but you can read the last chapter. It is like its individual standalone, very short book, I would guess, or short story that was posted or that was published posthumously. Uh, and I have not been able to get my hands on actually reading it. I think it's very expensive. But I do know from research that in this missing last chapter, the girls saw Miss McGraw going up, to Hanging Rock, but she not only was like in her skivvies, but she was starting to turn into this crab like creature. And there's also the section in this last chapter where the girls all throw their corsets off and then they're suspended in mid-air. So that really lends itself well to the idea that they were going up Hanging Rock to get out of their constrictive society, very literally, but also figuratively, that if they were going to have to exist in this patriarchal society with all of these expectations on them, none of the freedoms that they really wanted to enjoy, that they would rather just throw it all off and go into some unknown space, wherever the case may be, wherever they might go. And I like the ambiguous ending that we get. I don't want it all wrapped up. So what do you think?
I think if it was wrapped up, we wouldn't have had the great conversation we've just had about all of these different themes, etc. So look how much we've been able to talk about it because it was, ambiguous, I think. So, and again, to jump back to my star rating as well, that's one of the reasons I really liked it is the unknown element of it, which is a bit of a shift from a lot of the books I've read recently also. So I found myself thinking about it a lot afterwards, and I think it's a really good sign of a book if you're still thinking about it a week, 2 weeks after you've read it, then for me that's a good read because it's provoked you to think about it well beyond the words on the page. So yeah, I haven't read the last chapter, but I think I liked it as it was.
Yeah. I do too. I tend to like more explicit endings a little bit. I think it works very well for this book. I also feel like I would have enjoyed her tapping into like a sci-fi-ish kind of, answer for what happens, like a time warp or a time loop, or that they were able to go to another dimension. I kind of wanted it to be that, but then I think it would have been pigeonholed as a sci-fi book or something, so I understand and I see why it didn't happen, but I kind of like knowing that ending exists and then still being able to do what I want with the ambiguous ending. So
You
we
get
get
the
the best
best
of
of
both
it. Yeah,
worlds.
exactly. I like the ambiguous ending because I feel like it fits so well with the themes of this novel, and it leaves so much interpretation for the reader, but at the same time there are hints and clues, so it's not like an ambiguous ending that's not earned. I feel like this one is earned and goes just perfectly with everything else. Let's see. We have a quote that Adrian shared. Nobody can be held responsible for the pranks of destiny. Yes, exactly. So many people were blamed or felt, that they were blamed, but it was all ultimately something that happened in nature that couldn't be explained. Oh,
Cool.
well, that's good to know, Stina. She says her library has that final chapter through Hoopla. So if you have the Hoopla app, then I could check it out. Yes, the ambiguity, I could talk about it forever. Yeah. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you. Let's see. I know I said I'd try to keep it at an hour and a half, so we'll just kind of go with a little bit more and then wrap it up. So, a little bit about the film adaptation. I was going to watch it again last night, but I just didn't get around to it. But I did watch it for the first time a couple of months ago, and I actually saw the film before I read the book. So, once I saw the film, I was like, I really want to dig into the book. Uh, One of the things that I felt the film really honed in on is this idea of dreams. The I think it's the first lines, but I know it's at the beginning. One of the characters says, all that we see or seem is but a dream, which is a paraphrase of a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. And if y'all couldn't tell, I don't know if you can see my Poe back there, the live thing might be in the way, but there he is. I'm a quite a bit of a Poe fan, so I thought I would just read the poem quickly and talk about this aspect of the dreamlike nature. Take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through the fingers to the deep. While I weep, while I weep, O God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? O God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? And so that makes a dreamlike reading of the novel too very, very potentially a great way to look at the novel. Any thoughts if you did watch the movie? Connections or differences between the book and the movie that really stood out to you?
Yeah, I thought the movie was great. I did see it after reading the book, so I kind of knew what I was expecting. But I love the airiness and the lightness of it. I like that I was able to appreciate like the size of the monolith. Like it was like that's when I was like, oh wow, like this is a really big thing. Like when
Mhm.
I first read it, I didn't see the impact of it. So I think they did a beautiful job with that. And I loved like the girls in their white outfits, and it did give a little bit more like midsummer, like
Yes.
kind of culty vibe that the book doesn't necessarily do, but I didn't mind it because I like that. So I found that it tapped into a whole other kind of thing that I liked as well. So and I think it did justice to the book. I thought it was great.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I agree. I really, really liked it. I liked how it was shot as well. I know the shooting and cinematography is very much of its time, being in the 70s, etc. But there was almost a, I don't know what the the sort of the cinematography type would be, but it was almost like low from everyone, especially Miranda, I think, in terms of how it was shot with it, which I think just added to that almost dreamlike
Yes.
state that we talked about. I also got a very strong, almost it's interesting you mentioned Midsummer, a very folk horror vibe of it as well. I think the natural world, just because of being able to visualize and see where it was shot, was very strong. Um, and then the fact that it was just these guys in the middle of the almost woods, and the very foreshadowing of hanging rock, etc. as well being there. It was gave a very folk horror vibe to me from a lot of other films I've seen like that as well. But I did really, really like it. I love period style movies anyway, or TV series. So I enjoyed the visual experience of watching it as well as reading it. Like you, I watched it. I watched it maybe when I was about three-quarters of the way through the book. So I thought, well, I may as well watch it now. Anyway, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it did it justice. There is also, I think we mentioned this before, the miniseries on Amazon Prime, which I started to watch. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really get into it. I'm not sure. I might go back and watch it again. I'm not sure that from the first episode that I watched is doing it as much justice as the movie has. So I'll have to yet to be convinced on that. So if anybody's seen the miniseries, be interested to hear what you think. But for me, so far, I've struggled to get into it.
I haven't started the miniseries yet. I thought, because of the way my brain is, I said, let me do this live
Mm,
discussion first. And
yeah.
then I might watch the miniseries. But I agree with the film adaptation. I think it did justice to the novel. And one of the other things, too, that I forgot to mention when I was reading my Poe poem, but at the opening of the movie, too, whenever this quote, all that we see is a dream within a dream, the movie opens up with Miranda waking up, and then you see, I can't remember, I think it's Irma. She's like getting ready, but first you see the reflection of her in the mirror, and then it spans out and you see that you see her actual face looking at herself in the mirror. So again, that idea of are we seeing reality? Is this a reflection? Just all of that, I thought, really gave us something to go on at the beginning. So I was immediately pulled in to the movie, because you give me something like Poe, you give me the waking up and the mirror imagery, and I'm like, you got me.
I also thought the relationship between Miranda and Sarah, or Sarah and Miranda, and I think the potential queer relationship there, at least mostly from Sarah's side, was really strong in the movie. I think it was subtly hinted at in the book, but it was really strong, I felt, in the movie. Where I definitely think that Sarah was in love with
Yes,
Miranda. Whether or not that was reciprocated, I think maybe Miranda's feelings were slightly more of a she just really cared for her, and it was in her nature to want to look after people, and she had that sort of feeling towards Sarah. But yeah, I definitely got the feeling from the movie that Sarah was in love with Miranda. Yeah.
I did too. I thought it was much more prevalent, like you said,
Hmm.
in the movie. So let's see comments real quick. Um, oh, Adrian's library has it. Yay. It is. It is. It's definitely like also when Martina talked about that dream-like quality, the filter that they put on it really makes it feel dream-like. Yes, Midsummer. That
Daytime
leads
horror. Yeah.
that leads us now to some read alikes and watch alikes. So, since everybody's talking about Midsummer, we'll start with that. Definitely being a watch alike for the book. Again, the daytime horror, nature encroaching on humanity, even though you have, obviously, if you've seen Midsummer, the Harga, but they exist in nature. And there are even the aspects where, yes, Danny, has partaken of some shroom tea, but, she puts her hand down and it's like the grass is growing through her hands, and she's becoming not only one with the Harga, but one with the land around them too. A couple of other watch alikes I have are Twin Peaks. just for that cosmic vibe and that idea of what the hell is happening here. I don't know, but I love it. Definitely cosmic and mysterious, and of course, involving a young woman, Laura Palmer. And then, even though it's mostly nighttime and dark horror, I thought about The Witch too, because any excuse I have to talk about Robert Eggers' The Witch, I will do that. But also, it's because, again, you have nature encroaching on, well, you have people encroaching on nature, and the idea that nature doesn't give a flip about the people. So you have the supernatural element with the witch too, but you also have, the fact that they're afraid of the woods. The woods, they're trying to hunt, right? The dad can't be successful at hunting. He's not successful at growing crops, so he's trying to control his family by having them leave a sort of stable environment, and he cannot control nature. As it ends up, he can't control his family either. So that made me think about the witch in that aspect. And for read alikes, I'm about 70% through The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. There's also a film adaptation, but I'm going to wait and watch the film adaptation after I read the book. I'm not really enjoying the book a lot, to be honest with you. Although I can see how it can have parallels to Picnic at Hanging Rock, because you've got this mysterious element with these young girls and what happens to them. But I'll just say it's pretty obvious that this book was written by a man, and I don't know what I think about it, but I think I will enjoy the film more because it is directed by Sofia Coppola. So I'm looking forward to the film, trying to slog through the book. But another book is my favorite book of 2024, The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Keist. And that has another aspect of time being relative, because you have a veil that covers over a neighborhood, and the people who are in the neighborhood cannot get out, and no one from the outside world can get into the neighborhood except for the three girls who made it out of the neighborhood the night the veil came down. But time has stopped within that veil and in that neighborhood, and it's such a unique way of looking at haunting and trauma. And another book that is obviously definitely inspired by Picnic at Hanging Rock is Disappearance at Devil's Rock by Paul Tremblay. That one has that mysterious element, like what happened at this rock, very ambiguous ending, which is pretty par for the course with Paul Tremblay. But those are some movies and books that to me are read alikes and watch alikes. Anybody else have any read alikes and watch alikes that you want to talk about?
I have a watch alike that I definitely got. It's much more modern, obviously. Donnie Darko. I don't know if anybody's ever seen that movie, um, but it is really weird the first time you watch it, and you're like, "Is this happening? Is it not happening? Did he die when the plane landed on the house? Did he not die? Is this an afterlife?" And for that reason, that felt very similar, I think, to me, just in terms of the whole unknown, the uncanny, that cosmic horror element for sure. Um, I had a few of the ones that you mentioned as well, Jen, but from a sort of book stroke film perspective, because it's just been made into a film as well. Actually, it's not a book; it's a short story. The Life of Chuck by Stephen King, because I'm a horror fan and I like Stephen King. But again, when I started reading that, I was like, what is going on here? It's like, is the world ending? Is it not ending? And the more you read that book, and I won't give it away, you progressively get closer to understanding what's going on. And again, there's a very strong cosmic horror feel to that book as well, and a very powerful, poignant story behind it also, to the fleeting nature of human life, let me just say. So yeah, and that's also being made into a movie, which I haven't seen yet because in the UK we don't get that until August, unfortunately. So I haven't seen the movie just yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. I haven't seen the movie yet either, but I love the
Yeah.
story. Great
Mhm.
recommendation. Isabel?
It's funny because I wanted to say Donnie Darko. That's what I came here wanting to say,
Oh,
but I
sorry.
couldn't. I couldn't. Like, I was not gonna say it because I said I think it's just me. Like, I don't want people going into Donnie Darko if they've never experienced, it's like this. But now that you said it, it validates what I felt. I think there's so
Mm,
many parallels. Although there's not a bunch of girls, there's just, I mean, it's totally different, right? But I feel Donnie Darko gives you that same unease, that same
yeah.
like weird thing happening. Although it is very dark, it is darker. But I mean, if you haven't seen Donnie Darko, I think it's such a great film to
Hmm.
watch if you want to try it out. So that was gonna be my watch alike.
I'm sorry. I stole your movie.
No, you validated it. But
It just shows that, hey, great minds, right?
absolutely.
So let's see, we got some more recommendations. Late
Oh,
Monday.
yes.
Yes.
That's a good
Yes.
one. Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. But
Hmm.
that has a gut punch, right? It's
Hmm.
slow, very slow. So if you like the slow kind of the questioning too, what's real, what isn't, and an ending that will like haunt you forever, that is a great recommendation, Adrian. Definitely. Let's see. Yeah, okay, yeah. Jackie said I didn't like the virgin suicides equate to not knowing a young man's experience. Right. It's definitely male gaze, male gaze literature for sure. But I'm invested enough to keep going at it, and it's not very long. So, any other comments? Pop them in the chat. And before we go, I want to say thank you to Isabel and Martina and to everyone who joined us for the chat. And I also want to thank anyone who is catching the replay. And Isabel, would you share with us a little bit about what you have upcoming on your channel, or any other things that you want to share with us?
Sure. So I'm currently working on a book shopping vlog. Trying to edit that. So that's going to be coming up soon. I also have a little bit of footage from being able to see Stephen Graham Jones last night. I'm still on the high of having met him. He was incredible. So I was able to get a little bit of footage and some pictures. So I'm putting some of that stuff together. And I am currently also working on a reading journal update video. So that's coming up, and more of, reading wrap ups and stuff like that. So that's currently what I'm working on.
Great.
Martina?
Yeah, so again, my channel's so new. I feel like I'm still finding my feet, right? So one of the things I haven't really done to date has been planned out what I'm gonna do. I almost wing it. It's like, what will I do today? But
Mhm.
I think most of us start out that way, and then you get a little bit more organized. So the biggest thing I have going on right now is I've just started rereading all of Stephen King's works. So there's a little video on my channel. If you haven't seen that already, go have a look. I'm starting with Carrie. I've finished Carrie. And I've got a live coming up on that, which Jen is going to help me out with, which is fantastic because she is the woman in the know. She's written a thesis on Stephen King and leading ladies, so really excited for that. But Carrie's just the beginning. I do want to spend some time working out a schedule for that, so people know, which book we're going to read which month. Obviously, they go in order, etc. I'm trying to get organized with the Discord, all that kind of stuff. So the Stephen King reread probably going to be a long haul adventure for the next while. So keep an eye on the channel for more information on that, and the Discord when it's up and running. Aside from that, I have a number of tags. People have started to tag me in, which is great. So I've got some interesting tag videos coming up in relation to movies and books. So that's interesting. And again, I'm going to start trying to do some more vlogs as I'm reading books as well. I haven't been very good at that, but people have said they enjoy that type of content. So yeah, so look out for some more vlog type content featuring my two golden retrievers, Daisy and Billy.
Wonderful. So again, I will say if you haven't subscribed to Isabel's channel and Martina's channel, please do so. As you can tell, they have some exciting content coming up. So what I have coming up is we'll be hosting my first reading, watching, and activity event in November called Vamp November. Two of the co-hosts are here with me today. I have several other co hosts, so I am working on getting together everything for Vampvember. Look for announcement videos and more details toward the end of September. Other things I have coming up on my channel, I am still, if you're wondering, I'm still working on my deep dive into Night Film by Marisha Pessel. It's just summers are difficult for me for a few reasons, so it takes me a lot longer to work on in-depth videos than other times of the year. The next book club pick for the Literary Love Book Club will be in August. We are an every other month, a bi-monthly book club. The next pick is Crypt of the Moon Spider by Nathan Ballingrad. It's short, and I think that's all I have to talk about upcoming on my channel. So let's look at a few more comments before we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Let's see. Let's see. I want to make sure I pop up everybody's comment. Yeah, I know, right? You could reread it and find so many new things every time.
That's my
Oh,
husband reminding me that that's coming up on my channel too. Our buddy read on Good Omens.
oh, yay!
There are thoughts. There are thoughts on that. So that's coming up too.
Be sure to look out for that also. Thank you, Liz. We appreciate you being here. They're a thought, right? Ariel's ready to give her thoughts about Good Omens. Yay! Thank you,
Oh,
Eleanor.
thank
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So once again, thank you so much to Isabel, Martina, and everybody in the chat, everybody who's going to watch the replay. We appreciate you, and we will see you again soon. Bye.
Bye, guys.